Have you ever gone to the store to pick something up that you thought you wanted, finished your shopping, and gone all the way back home again, only to realize when you get there that the thing that you bought wasn't what you wanted at all? And as you take a closer look at the box, like you should have done from the beginning, you realize that this clearly isn't the thing that you thought it was. And then you feel stupid and embarrassed, but it'll be 4 more years before the store you bought it from implements any kind of return policy because it just can't be asked. So now you're stuck with your mistake, desperately trying to make use of it so you don't feel like such a moron. Welcome to Robert's Game Corner. Today we're looking at The 39 Steps by The Story Mechanics, a game I bought thinking it was a point-and-click adventure game, only to realize that when I got it, it was actually a visual novel, which I would have realized if I had bothered to read the tags, or indeed if I had ever bothered to culture myself in any way, shape, or form, since if I had, I might have recognized The 39 Steps as a digital adaptation of the famous book, movie, and play with the same title. Left with little choice, I swallowed my embarrassment and actually attempted to enjoy my misbegotten purchase, only to be further put to shame by the fact that the 39 Steps is actually pretty good. The plot is of course the same. Protagonist Richard Hannay is a somewhat affluent ex-soldier visiting London in 1914. Bored to tears, he's about to leave the very next day when he's approached by an American journalist who is embroiled in a vast and deep-rooted conspiracy by a cabal of anarcho-capitalists to start World War I by assassinating a foreign dignitary on British soil. Planning to foil the attempt, the journalist asks to hide out in Richard's apartment until the day of the attack, and, enamored by the element of danger, Richard agrees to house him. And I imagine he feels the weight of his own stupidity pretty heavily when he comes home one night to find the journalist stabbed to death in his living room. With no one to turn to and the cabal of conspirators closing in, Richard must go on the run to stay alive until he can foil the assassination himself. The primary thing one has to consider when looking at this version of the 39 Steps is how it compares to the other versions. Personally, I found the answer to be more than I would have guessed, but less than I would have hoped. One might reasonably think that the inherent advantage of telling a story through a game would be its interactivity. Control over the main character and their actions provides a level of immersion that simply can't be achieved by other forms of media, which is why I'm so baffled as to the reason they made it a visual novel. So-called walking simulators catch a lot of grief for having the least amount of interactivity of any other genre of game. Yet for some reason I never hear these same people complaining about visual novels, a genre of interactive digital media which somehow manages to have even fewer mechanical elements. Although I suppose one could argue that the near total absence of interactivity is what makes visual novels more stomachable than walking simulators, since you don't have to drag yourself very slowly from one cluster of exposition to the next while the game oversaturates you with ambient symbolism, but I digress. This version does attempt to immerse you with a modicum of interactivity. To progress the dialogue, you have to move the mouse in a clockwise, circular fashion, and to go back to previous dialogue, you have to move it counterclockwise, creating the feeling you're viewing the story through one of those old-timey newspaper viewers and libraries. Additionally, in each scene, there's generally at least one thing to pick up and examine, such as an article from a newspaper in 1914, or a handwritten letter, or some other thing to cement the notion that you are in the story's time period. Once in a while, the game makes you perform a series of commands with the mouse to have the character execute an action. For example, at one point the character has to shave, so you have to make a bunch of crude movements meant to resemble shaving. It all does just enough to moderately enhance the experience of listening to an audiobook, which, let's be honest, that's exactly what you're doing. The hand-painted artwork, original soundtrack, and voice acting are all really nice, but for them to be anything less would have been nothing short of an absolute disaster, so it's good to know the status quo was maintained. Some of the presentation choices did strike me as odd. For example, there is a point where Richard needs to go from one room in his house to another. So the screen zooms out to a map of his apartment and wants you to select the room to go in. The only room you can select is the bedroom where he needs to go, so you select the bedroom and then he goes into the bedroom. And then he does all the things he needs to do in the bedroom and it wants you to go back to the living room, so it zooms out again and has you select the living room. And if you try to select any other room in the house, it's all grayed out and you can't touch them. So you think, okay, after this I'll be able to explore all the rooms in the house. Nope, never. You never go back to the apartment and you don't explore any of the other rooms. So why is there a map? Why not just transition from one room to another, instead of having to ask me for the go-ahead to continue the story when the only other option is to turn the game off? Is the game trying to tell me I always have a choice? One of the bullet points posted in the description informed me that the game boasts a, quote, 5 to 8 hours of gameplay, and I can only be left to wonder why. Surely it doesn't take that long to tell the story, considering it's both a movie and a play. Maybe it's all the little extra things, but does it need to be 5 to 8 hours? My first instinct is to say no, but I can't imagine that I would have been as immersed without all the little extra things. While I can't say for certain that this is a better version of the 39 Steps, I can say that it was a story well told. So if you really like the 39 Steps, then check it out. If you really like visual novels, then you should also check it out. If you've never experienced the 39 Steps before and you wanted to give it a shot, and you don't like live performance, movies, or reading, then you're in luck, as this version adequately provides. Well, that's it for me. Next time on Robert's Game Corner, we'll look at more games that I thought were one thing and turned out to actually be another. Bye, everybody. See you next time.